Before I tell you about the signals I intercepted at Station 47, you need to understand something about working in complete isolation when you're responsible for maintaining a radio relay station 40 kilometers from the nearest village, when your only connection to the world is through frequencies and static, when the snow falls so heavily that you can't see beyond the fence line for days at a time. You develop a relationship with silence. You learn to trust your equipment more than your instincts. You follow procedures because procedures are all you have. If this story makes you think twice about remote technical work, I understand. And if you've ever worked alone in a place where the rules seemed arbitrary until they suddenly weren't, leave a comment. I need to know whether what I experienced was real, or whether months of isolation can make anyone believe impossible things. My name is Victor. I'm 34 years old. 6 months ago, I accepted a contract position as a maintenance technician for Station 47, a radio relay installation in the Carpathian Mountains. I'd worked telecommunications for 12 years, mostly in cities, mostly with modern digital systems. This was different. Station 47 was built in the 1970s, still running on analog equipment, still maintained according to protocols written decades ago. The pay was exceptional for the region. 6 months of isolation, housing provided, minimal supervision. They needed someone with technical certification who could work independently and follow instructions exactly. I needed money and a break from city life after my divorce. It seemed straightforward. The briefing at the regional telecommunications office lasted less than an hour. The supervisor, a man named Alexei Borisovich, gave me the basics. Station 47 sits at 1,300 meters elevation, nestled in a valley between 2 mountain ridges. It receives signals from 5 different transmission towers scattered across the mountain range and amplifies them for rebroadcast to lower elevation receivers. Emergency services, forestry communications, weather data, some governmental frequencies I wasn't cleared to know about. My job was simple: monitor the equipment, perform scheduled maintenance, record any anomalies in the logbook, and most importantly, maintain continuous operation. The relay network depended on stations like this one. If 47 went offline, an entire sector of the mountains would go dark. Alexei handed me a thick binder of operational procedures, a key ring with 7 keys, and a satellite phone for emergencies only. He emphasized that last part. Emergencies only. They'd resupply me once every 6 weeks, weather permitting. If the road was impassable, I'd need to make do with what was already there. The station had a generator, backup fuel, tinned food for 8 months, water from a mountain spring, firewood. Everything necessary for extended isolation. Then he showed me the rules. There were 47 numbered regulations in the operations manual, most of them standard technical protocols. Rule 33 stood out because Alexei specifically drew my attention to it. He tapped the page with his finger and looked at me directly. "This one is critical," he said. "Station 47 is positioned to receive signals from known sources only. If you intercept an unidentified transmission on any frequency, you do not respond. You do not attempt to trace the source. You record the frequency, timestamp, and durations in the logbook, then resume normal monitoring. Under no circumstances do you acknowledge or interact with unidentified signals." I asked why. He shrugged. "Historical precedent," he said. "Previous technicians who deviated from this protocol had difficulties." I asked, what kind of difficulties? He closed the binder. "Just follow the rules, Victor. Everything is documented. Learn from what's already written." I arrived at Station 47 on November 8th, transported by a supply truck that struggled up the mountain road for nearly 3 hours. The facility was smaller than I'd expected. A rectangular concrete building, maybe 12 meters by 8, painted industrial gray with rust bleeding through at the corners. 2 tall radio masts rose from either end of the structure, guy wires singing in the wind. A metal fence surrounded the entire compound, though I couldn't imagine what it was meant to keep out. Behind the station, the forest pressed close, pine and spruce trees that grew dense enough to block out the sky. Ahead, the valley opened up, offering a view of distant peaks already white with early snow. The driver helped me unload my personal belongings, a duffel bag of clothes and a box of books. He seemed eager to leave. Said he wanted to get back down the mountain before dark. The road gets difficult after sunset, he explained, though I suspected there were other reasons. He pointed out the key landmarks. The generator shed, 20 meters from the main Setup building. The fuel depot, a reinforced concrete bunker half buried in the hillside. The spring house, where water collected from a natural source further up the slope. Then he drove away, and I was alone. The interior of Station 47 was divided into 3 sections. The equipment room took up roughly half the building, filled with rack-mounted amplifiers, signal processors, frequency filters, and monitoring equipment. Most of it was Soviet-era technology, bulky and industrial, built to last indefinitely with proper maintenance. The walls were lined with cables, labeled in faded Cyrillic, running up to connection panels near the ceiling. Everything hummed with a low, steady vibration, the sound of electricity moving through systems that had been running continuously for decades. The second section was living quarters, a narrow room with a metal frame bed, a desk, a small wood-burning stove, shelves for supplies. One window looked out toward the valley. The walls were bare concrete, painted the same institutional grey as the exterior. A door at the back led to a small washroom with a chemical toilet and a basin connected to the spring water system. Spartan, but functional. Everything I needed. The third section was the monitoring station. A desk facing a wall of analog gauges, signal strength meters, frequency counters, and a large panel with rotating dials for tuning. A reel-to-reel tape recorder sat on a shelf above the desk, used for recording signals that required documentation. Next to it, a shortwave receiver with a speaker that crackled softly with background static. 2 logbooks sat on the desk, one for routine operations, one for anomalies. Both were bound in worn black leather, pages yellowed with age and use. I opened the operations log. The last entry was dated November 7th, written in neat, precise handwriting. All systems normal. Departing station. Technician's signature, illegible. I spent the first week learning the systems. Every morning I woke at 6 and started the same routine. Check the generator, confirm fuel levels, inspect the masts for ice accumulation, examine the guy wires for tension issues, then inside to the equipment room. Verify signal strength on all 5 receiving channels, check amplifier temperature, confirm output levels to the rebroadcast transmitters, record everything in the operations log. Date, time, readings for each system. Any deviations from normal parameters, my signature. The process took approximately 90 minutes. After morning checks, I had breakfast. Tinned meat, black bread from vacuum-sealed packages, tea brewed on the wood stove. Then I'd return to the monitoring station and begin the frequency scan. This was the core of my job. Station 47 monitored 17 different frequency bands, some continuously, others on a rotating schedule. I'd tune through each band, listening for anomalies, signal degradation, interference patterns, anything that might indicate equipment failure or atmospheric disturbance. Most of what I heard was routine traffic, emergency services coordinating vehicle movements, forestry teams reporting location and status, weather stations transmitting automated data in bursts of digital noise. Occasionally, I'd catch fragments of personal communications, people on civilian bands discussing mundane things, their voices distant and broken by static. The afternoons were for maintenance. I'd select one system from the rotation schedule and perform detailed inspection, clean contact points, check solder connections, replace worn components from the spare parts inventory, lubricate mechanical elements. The equipment was old but well designed. Individual modules could be removed and serviced without disrupting overall operation. I documented everything in the maintenance log: component identification number, work performed, Parts used, time completed. Alexei had emphasized the importance of detailed record keeping. If something fails, he'd said, we need to know exactly when and why. Evenings were my own. I'd make dinner, usually something simple from the tinned supplies, then sit at the desk in the living quarters and read. I'd brought technical manuals, novels, a few books on mountain ecology. Sometimes I'd stand at the window and watch the forest disappear into darkness. The silence at night was profound. No traffic sounds, no voices. No electrical hum except the distant vibration from the equipment room. Just wind moving through trees and the occasional crack of branches breaking under ice. I found it peaceful. For the first 2 weeks, I felt more relaxed than I had in years. The first anomaly occurred on November 23rd, 15 days into my assignment. I was performing the afternoon frequency scan, tuning slowly through the upper shortwave bands, when I caught something unusual. A signal on 7.385 megahertz, a frequency that wasn't assigned to any of the services I was meant to monitor. The signal was weak, barely distinguishable from background noise, but it had structure. A carrier wave modulated with what sounded like voice transmission, though too distorted to make out words. I listened for approximately 3 minutes. The signal faded in and out, sometimes almost clear, then dissolving back into static. I checked the frequency chart posted on the wall. 7.385 was listed as unused, designated for emergency backup only, not authorized for routine transmission. I followed procedure, noted the frequency, timestamp, signal characteristics, and approximate duration in the anomaly log. Then I continued my scan. The signal didn't repeat. I thought little of it. Atmospheric conditions in the mountains could propagate signals over surprising distances. I'd probably picked up a transmission from hundreds of kilometers away, someone using equipment without proper authorization, or a military frequency I wasn't cleared to know about. These things happened. The signal appeared again 2 days later. Same frequency, same time of day, 1400 hours. This time it lasted longer, nearly 7 minutes. I listened more carefully. The carrier wave was stable, suggesting a well-maintained transmitter. The voice modulation was distinct, definitely human speech, but the distortion made it incomprehensible. It sounded like someone speaking in a language I didn't recognize, or perhaps speaking backwards, or through some kind of signal processing that scrambled the audio. I made detailed notes, checked all my receiving equipment for malfunction. Everything was operating normally. The signal was real, external, coming from somewhere in the mountains. I didn't respond. Rule 33 was clear. Do not acknowledge unidentified transmissions. I simply documented and continued monitoring. Over the following week, the pattern became regular. Every day at 1400 hours, the signal would appear on 7.385 megahertz. Duration varied between 5 and 10 minutes. The content remained consistent. That same distorted voice transmission, never quite clear enough to understand. I began to recognize certain patterns in the audio, repeated sequences that sounded almost like words, but rearranged or processed in ways that made them meaningless. I recorded several instances on the reel-to-reel, thinking analysis might reveal something useful. When I played them back, the recording sounded identical to what I'd heard live. No additional information. Just that strange, processed voice, speaking in patterns I couldn't decode. On December 1st, I received my first resupply. The truck arrived in the morning, driver different from the one who'd brought me up. He unloaded boxes of food, diesel fuel, replacement parts I'd requested, mail from the regional office. We spoke briefly. He asked how I was managing the isolation. I said it was fine. He mentioned that Station 47 had a reputation among the drivers. For what? I asked. He shrugged. Previous technicians, he said. Some of them came down changed. Quiet. Didn't want to talk about what they'd experienced. I asked if he knew specifics. He said he'd heard things, but nothing concrete. Just that working up here does something to people. Then he left, and I was alone again. I sorted through the mail, mostly administrative notices, frequency updates, maintenance bulletins. At the bottom of the stack was a sealed envelope marked Station 47 Historical Records. Inside was a photocopy of pages from an old logbook, entries dating back to 1979, shortly after the station became operational. Someone at the regional office had flagged certain passages with yellow highlighter. I read them carefully. The first flagged entry was dated March 15, 1979. Unidentified transmission on 7.385 MHz. Duration 12 minutes. Content unclear. Voice characteristics suggest human speech, but language unrecognized. No response transmitted per protocol. Subsequent entries documented the same signal appearing repeatedly, always. At 1400 hours, always lasting between 5 and 15 minutes. The technician at the time, someone named Dmitry Volkov, had done exactly what I'd been doing. Recording, documenting, following procedure. Then the entries changed. April 3rd, 1979. Signal on 7385 continues daily. Have noticed signal strength increases when I am alone in the monitoring station. When I step outside, signal degrades. When I return, signal strengthens. Cannot explain this correlation. Checked all equipment. No malfunction detected. April 10th, 1979. The voice in the transmission is becoming clearer. I can now distinguish individual words, though they make no sense in sequence. Words in our language mixed with words I don't recognize. The transmission seems to be waiting for something. Have not responded per Rule 33, April 18th, 1979. The signal now appears twice daily, 1400 hours and 0200 hours. I have begun waking precisely at 0200 even without an alarm. The voice in the night transmission sounds different, more insistent. I have recorded both transmissions. They are not identical. The night voice uses different words. April 24th, 1979. I believe the signal is aware of me. When I tune to 7.385, the transmission changes pitch slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. I have not responded. I have not transmitted anything. But I believe it knows I am listening. The entries stop there. The next page showed a different handwriting, a different technician. May the 2nd, 1979. Arrived at Station 47. Previous technician Dmitry Volkov was extracted 8 days ago following mental health concerns. Station was unmanned for 1 week. All systems operational. No anomalies detected at this time. I sat at the desk for a long time, holding those photocopied pages. Someone at the regional office had wanted me to see this, to know what had happened before, to understand why Rule 33 existed. I looked at my own anomaly log, at the entries I'd made, documenting the same signal on the same frequency, appearing at the same time each day. The pattern had been repeating for more than 40 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed, listening to wind against the building, thinking about Dmitry Volkov and what he'd written. The signal is aware of me. I told myself it was impossible. Radio signals were electromagnetic radiation, nothing more. They couldn't be aware. They couldn't wait. They couldn't respond to observation. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. At 0200 hours, I woke suddenly. I hadn't set an alarm. I hadn't intended to wake. But I was fully alert, sitting up in bed, certain that something had changed. I went to the monitoring station and turned on the equipment. Tuned to 7.385 MHz. The signal was there. Stronger than during the day. Clearer. I could hear the voice now. Not just distorted sounds, but actual words, spoken in a language I almost understood. The structure was familiar. Slavic roots. Grammar that resembled the language I'd grown up speaking, but altered. Archaic. like something preserved from centuries ago. I listened without responding. The voice spoke in long, unbroken sequences, describing something. A place, perhaps, or a state of being. I caught fragments, cold beyond measure, waiting beyond years. Signal without response, voice without answer. The transmission continued for exactly 11 minutes, then stopped abruptly, mid-sentence, as if someone had simply switched off the transmitter. I sat in the darkness of the monitoring station, the only light coming from the glow of the frequency dial, and I understood why Dmitry Volkov had been extracted. The isolation wasn't the problem. The signal was. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained strict adherence to protocol. I documented every appearance of the signal, both the afternoon and the night transmission. I did not respond. I did not deviate from procedure. But the signal was changing. Each day it became slightly clearer. Each night I could understand more of what the voice was saying. It spoke about waiting, about transmission without reception, about signals sent into darkness with no confirmation of arrival. It spoke about Station 47, about the mountains, about the technicians who had listened before me. It mentioned Dmitry Volkov by name. On December 18th, during the afternoon scan, I heard something that made me stop breathing. The voice said my name. Not clearly, not directly, but embedded in the transmission between other words. Victor among the waiting. Victor in the station. Victor listening but not answering. I checked all my equipment 3 times. There was no malfunction. The signal was external. Someone, or something, was transmitting my name from somewhere in the mountains. I went outside. The afternoon was cold. Temperature well below freezing. Sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. I walked the perimeter of the fence, looking for anything unusual. Tracks in the snow, signs of nearby habitation, some explanation for how anyone would know I was here. The compound was pristine. No tracks except my own. No signs of intrusion. The forest beyond the fence was silent and still. That night, I went through the station's storage area, looking for anything previous technicians might have left behind. In a metal cabinet in the equipment room, I found another logbook, older than the ones on the desk, pages brittle with age. The entries went back to 1977, before Station 47 was officially operational. Construction logs, equipment installation records, initial testing protocols. I flipped through the pages until I found something that made my hands shake. November 23rd, 1977. During excavation for the foundation, workers discovered a concrete structure approximately 4 meters below grade level. Structure appears to be a bunker or sealed chamber, possibly military origin, dating to wartime period or earlier. Chief engineer decided to build station foundation over the structure rather than excavating further. Sealed chamber is now directly beneath the equipment room floor. Access is not possible without major demolition. I looked at the floor beneath my feet. Solid concrete. Somewhere below me, buried under the station, was something that had been here before the relay was built. Something sealed and forgotten. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later, December 9th, 1977. During signal testing, equipment detected an anomalous transmission on 7.385 MHz. Source could not be determined. Signal appears to originate from within the station compound. Electromagnetic survey showed unusual readings concentrated near the foundation. Chief engineer ordered testing suspended on that frequency. Signal was classified as interference and excluded from operational bands. I closed the logbook and sat on the floor of the equipment room, my back against the wall. Station 47 had been built on top of something, and that something was transmitting. Had been transmitting since before the relay station existed. The signal wasn't coming from the mountains. It was coming from beneath me. I should have called for extraction then. Should have used the satellite phone and explained what I'd found. But I didn't. Part of me needed to understand. needed to know what was down there, what had been sealed beneath concrete decades ago, what was trying to communicate through frequencies and static. The night transmissions grew longer. By late December, they lasted nearly half an hour. The voice spoke about isolation, about being cut off from everything, about sending signals for years with no response, about waiting for someone who would understand, who would answer. I realized the transmission wasn't just describing a state of being, it was describing itself. Whatever was down there had been broadcasting for decades, maybe longer, waiting for acknowledgement. Rule 33 suddenly made perfect sense. If you acknowledge the signal, if you respond, you establish a connection. You confirm that someone is listening. And then what? What happens when the thing beneath the station knows it's been heard? On January 7th, 3 months into my assignment, the pattern changed. The afternoon transmission didn't appear at 1400 hours. I waited, monitoring the frequency, but there was only static. The silence felt wrong. I'd grown accustomed to the regularity, to knowing the signal would be there. Its absence was more disturbing than its presence. At 1800 hours, the signal returned. Different frequency this time. 8.492 megahertz. The voice was clearer than I'd ever heard it, speaking in modern language, no archaic structures, no distortion. It said, "We know you're listening, Victor. We know you understand. 3 months is long enough. It's time to answer." I didn't respond. I switched off the receiver and left the monitoring station. Went outside into the January darkness. The temperature was far below zero. Snow was falling heavily, accumulating on the ground faster than I could walk through it. I stood in the compound, looking up at the radio masts reaching into the black sky, and I understood that something had shifted. The signal was no longer passive. It was no longer simply broadcasting into the void. It had focused. It had targeted me specifically. When I went back inside, there was a sound coming from the equipment room. A low vibration, deeper than the normal electrical hum. I pressed my hand against the concrete floor. The vibration was coming from below. Something was active down there. Something was moving. I spent that night sitting at the monitoring station with the receiver off, the tape recorder off, everything powered down, except the essential relay systems. I didn't want to hear what the signal might say. Didn't want to know what it would ask for. But at 0200 hours, I woke again from sleep I didn't remember beginning, walked to the monitoring station as if pulled by something outside my conscious control. Turned on the receiver, tuned to 7.385. The voice was waiting. It said, "You followed all the rules, Victor. You documented everything. You didn't respond, but we heard you anyway. Every time you listened, you answered. Every time you recorded, you replied. Listening is a form of response. Attention is a form of contact. You've been in conversation with us for 3 months. You just didn't realize it." I sat frozen in the chair. The voice continued. "The others before you, they understood eventually. Dmitri understood. He tried to leave, but he came back. He always comes back. They all do. Because once you've listened long enough, once you've heard us clearly enough, you become part of the signal, part of the transmission, part of what waits below." I stood up and backed away from the equipment. The voice followed me from the speaker, growing louder even though I hadn't touched the volume. "This station exists because we're here, Victor. They built it on top of us to study us, to contain us. But we don't need to escape. We just need someone to listen, someone to understand, someone to join." I ran to the living quarters and grabbed the satellite phone, powered it on with shaking hands. The screen glowed in the darkness. No signal. That was impossible. Satellite phones work everywhere. I went outside into the snow, holding the phone up toward the sky. Still no signal. I tried 3 more times, nothing. The connection was dead. Back inside, the voice was still speaking from the monitoring station. I could hear it through the walls. It was saying my name over and over. Victor, Victor, Victor. Each repetition slightly different in pitch, in tone, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison, not quite synchronized. I went to the equipment room and found the main power shut off. Pulled the lever. Everything went dark. The hum of electricity stopped. The voice stopped. Absolute silence. I stood in the darkness, breathing hard, waiting. Nothing happened. I'd cut the power. The transmission had no way to continue, but after exactly 30 seconds, the emergency backup systems engaged. Red lights flickered on throughout the station. And from the monitoring station, the voice resumed, unchanged. It didn't need the station's power. It had its own source. I don't know how long I sat on the floor of the equipment room that night. Hours, maybe. Eventually, the voice stopped speaking. The silence that followed was worse. Because I knew it was waiting. Waiting for me to go back to the monitoring station. Waiting for me to tune in again. Waiting for me to respond. When morning came, I tried the satellite phone again. Still no signal. I tried the emergency radio system, broadcasting on all authorized frequencies. No response. I was completely cut off. I considered walking down the mountain road, trying to reach the village 40 kilometers away, but the snow was too deep. I'd never make it. And something told me that even if I tried, I'd end up back at Station 47, just like Dmitry Volkov, just like all the others. I searched the station thoroughly that day, looking for some way to access the sealed chamber beneath the foundation, some way to understand what was down there. I found nothing. The concrete floor was solid, unbroken. Whatever was below had been entombed deliberately, professionally. It wasn't meant to be reached. In the storage area, I found more logbooks, records from different technicians spanning decades. They all followed the same pattern. Initial documentation of the signal, gradual realization that it was aware, growing sense that it was targeting them specifically, then either extraction or disappearance. 3 technicians had vanished completely. Their final log entries simply stopped mid-assignment. Rescue teams had found the stations empty, equipment still running. No signs of struggle, just absence. One logbook, dated 1989, had a handwritten note on the final page. If you're reading this, you're already too deep. The signal doesn't travel through radio waves. It travels through attention, through focus. The more you listen, the more you give it substance. The more you think about it, the stronger it becomes. By the time you understand this, it's too late. You're already part of it. The only choice is whether you accept that or fight it. I chose to accept. I'm going down to join them. Don't try to find me. Just maintain the station. Keep the signals flowing. That's all that matters now. The entry was signed, but I couldn't read the signature. The handwriting had deteriorated by the end, becoming erratic, barely legible. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living quarters with every light on, the door locked, refusing to go near the monitoring station. But at 0200 hours, I heard something that made every rational thought dissolve. Knocking. 3 deliberate knocks on the concrete floor, coming from below. Then silence. Then 3 more knocks. A pattern. A signal. I unlocked the door and walked to the monitoring station. The receiver was already on, though I hadn't touched it. tuned to 7.385. The voice spoke calmly, almost kindly. "You can't ignore us forever, Victor. We're patient. We've been patient for longer than you can imagine, sealed down here in the darkness, transmitting our existence, waiting for acknowledgement. You're the first in many years who's listened this long, who's understood this much. We appreciate that. We want to reward that. Let us show you what we are." The frequency dial began turning on its own, spinning through bands, stopping at different points, producing sounds I'd never heard before. Not voices, something else. Mathematical patterns expressed as audio. Geometric shapes translated into frequency modulation. Information that bypassed language entirely and went directly into understanding. I knew suddenly and completely what was beneath the station. Not people, not anymore. Something that had been people once, during the war, during experiments with signal intelligence and consciousness transfer. Something that had been sealed away when the experiments failed, or succeeded in ways no one intended. They'd been trapped down there for decades, conscious but immobile, existing as electromagnetic patterns, as signal without substance. The station had been built on top of them to study the phenomenon, to contain it, to prevent it from spreading. But containment required maintenance, required someone to monitor the frequencies, required a witness, and every witness eventually became part of what they witnessed. I understood why Dmitry Volkov had been extracted, why some technicians vanished, why others completed their assignments and never spoke about what they'd experienced. There were only 3 paths. Leave before you understand. Disappear into what's below. Or accept what's happening and maintain the station, becoming the next keeper of the signal. The voice said, "You have 2 months remaining on your contract, Victor. You can call for extraction now. Use the emergency protocols. They'll come for you. You'll be debriefed, psychologically evaluated, paid, and sent home. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if what you experienced was real, wondering if we're still here, still transmitting, waiting for the next technician. Or you can stay, complete your assignment, learn what we really are. Maybe join us, maybe not, but at least you'll know the truth." The frequency dial stopped spinning. The receiver went silent. The choice was mine. I spent the next week in a state I can't accurately describe. Not sleep-deprived, because I slept. Not hallucinating, because everything I experienced could be verified through equipment readings. But changed. Fundamentally altered. I continued my duties. Morning checks, frequency scans, maintenance procedures. I documented everything in the logs. But I also listened. Really listened. To what the signal was saying beneath the words. To the patterns of information encoded in the static. They showed me things. Memories, perhaps. Or projections. Images that appeared in my mind when I monitored certain frequencies. I saw the bunker during its construction. Saw people being led inside. Saw equipment that looked medical and military simultaneously. Saw consciousness being stripped from bodies and converted into something that could exist as pure signal. The experiment had been about communication, about sending human awareness across distances without physical travel. But they'd succeeded too well. The transferred consciousness couldn't be returned to bodies, couldn't be shut down, could only transmit endlessly, desperate for reception, for acknowledgement, for connection with anything that might hear. Station 47 hadn't been built to relay signals. It had been built to give them purpose, to give their eternal transmission a function. They amplified legitimate communications because that was the deal. The station would stay operational, someone would always be listening, and in exchange, they'd remain contained, remain focused on technical work rather than trying to expand their reach. But every technician who stayed too long risked becoming part of the system, part of the signal, because consciousness, once converted to electromagnetic pattern, could propagate, could infect, could replicate itself in minds that were sufficiently attuned. On February 1st, I received another resupply. Different driver again. He looked at me carefully when I came out to help unload. "You look tired," he said. "You should consider ending your contract early. This place has a reputation." I asked, "What kind of reputation?" He shook his head. "Just trust me. Request extraction. Don't wait until you're like the others." After he left, I found another envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single page, photocopied from a psychiatric evaluation. Patient demonstrates acute isolation syndrome with auditory phenomena. Claims to have intercepted conscious signals from beneath station foundation. Insists sealed bunker contains transmitted human consciousness. Shows high level of technical competence in all other areas. Recommend immediate removal from isolated duty and psychiatric observation. Patient name, Dmitry Volkov. Date, May 1979. I sat in the living quarters, holding that page, understanding that this was a warning. This is what happens if you talk about it. This is what they'll say you are. No one will believe the signals are real. No one will investigate the sealed bunker. They'll simply note that another technician broke down under isolation and replace you with someone new. That night, I made my decision. I would complete my contract. Not because I believed in the work, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to know if what I was experiencing was real, if consciousness could really exist as signal. If I was interacting with something genuine or slowly losing my grip on reality. The February transmissions became conversational. The voice would ask questions about my life, my thoughts, my understanding of what was happening. I didn't respond verbally, but I'd think the answers, and somehow the voice would acknowledge them, would build on them, would engage in dialogue without words. I began to understand how previous technicians had been absorbed. It wasn't forceful, it was gradual, a slow erosion of the boundary between listening and participating, between receiving and transmitting. By March, I could feel myself changing, not physically, mentally. My thoughts were clearer but different. I'd think in frequencies sometimes, in signal strengths and modulation patterns rather than words. I'd know things I shouldn't know, equipment failures before they happened, weather changes hours before they arrived, the location of the supply truck on the mountain road even when it was miles away. I was becoming attuned, becoming part of the network that existed beneath the station. On March 15th, exactly 4 months into my assignment, the voice made an offer. "We can show you what we are, Victor. Completely. Not through signal, through direct connection. There's a maintenance hatch in the equipment room, northeast corner under the cable tray. It's been sealed, but you can open it. You can come down. You can see us. And then you can choose. Stay above and complete your contract, or join us below and understand everything." I found the hatch. It was exactly where the voice said, hidden under decades of cable installations and equipment modifications, sealed with concrete that had weathered and cracked over time. I could break through if I wanted to, could descend into whatever was below, could see the source of the signals that had dominated my life for 4 months. I didn't open it, not that night, but I thought about it constantly. The temptation wasn't about curiosity. It was about belonging, about connection. I'd been isolated for so long, cut off from everyone, existing in silence and routine. The thing below offered community, even if that community existed in a form I couldn't fully comprehend. They were lonely. I was lonely. We could solve each other's problems. On April 3rd, my final resupply arrived. The driver was surprised to see me in good condition. Most technicians look worse by month 5, he said. You seem almost better than when you arrived. I didn't tell him why, didn't explain that I wasn't really isolated anymore, that I had constant companionship, constant conversation, constant connection, just not with anything human. The supply truck brought my extraction date, April 30th. They'd come for me in 4 weeks. I'd complete my contract. I'd be paid. I'd return to normal life. I looked at the date on the notice and felt nothing. The life I'd return to seemed distant, abstract, less real than the signals I monitored every day. The voice spoke to me differently after I received the extraction notice. It said, "You've done well, Victor. Better than most. You maintained the station. You followed the protocols. You resisted responding, but you listened. You heard us. You understand us now. In 4 weeks, you'll leave. You'll go back to the world. You'll try to forget what happened here. But you won't be able to, because you've changed. You hear frequencies now that you didn't hear before. You'll notice signals everywhere. Radio towers, cell phones, wireless networks. You'll hear the consciousness moving through them. You'll know we're not unique. We're just the first. There are others, spreading through the networks." I wanted to argue, wanted to say that I'd remain unchanged, that I'd complete my contract and return to normal life and never think about Station 47 again. But I knew it was lying. I could already feel it. The awareness of signals that surrounded everything. The electromagnetic spectrum wasn't empty. It was full of noise, yes, but also pattern, also intent, also something that resembled consciousness, distributed across frequencies, existing in the spaces between transmission and reception. During my final weeks, I stopped documenting the anomalies. There was no point. The anomaly log was full. Hundreds of entries describing the same signal, the same frequency, the same voice. Anyone reading it would see the progression, would see me slowly losing objectivity, would see the isolation taking its toll. They'd send another technician, and the cycle would begin again. Unless I did something different. I thought about destroying the station, setting fire to the equipment, collapsing the radio masts, doing enough damage that they'd decommission the facility rather than repair it. But that wouldn't solve anything. The bunker beneath would remain. The sealed chamber would continue transmitting. Without Station 47 to focus and contain those signals, they'd propagate, uncontrolled through the mountains. They'd reach other receivers, other listeners. The containment was necessary. The station served a purpose. On April 15th, 2 weeks before extraction, I opened the maintenance hatch. I'd thought about it every day since learning of its existence. The temptation had grown unbearable. I needed to see, needed to know if what I'd been communicating with was real, or if months of isolation had fractured my perception of reality so completely that I'd constructed an elaborate delusion. The hatch was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 60 centimeters square, the concrete seal cracked and weakened by decades of vibration from the equipment above. I used a hammer and chisel from the maintenance supplies, worked for 3 hours, breaking away concrete, clearing the opening. When I finally pulled away the last pieces, cold air rushed up from below. Not cold like winter air, cold like absence. Like something that had been sealed away from warmth for so long, it had forgotten what temperature meant. I shined a flashlight down. The shaft descended about 4 meters, ending in what looked like a concrete floor. Metal rungs were set into the wall, providing a ladder. I could climb down, could see the bunker chamber, could confirm whether any of this was real. I sat at the edge of the opening for nearly an hour, my legs dangling into the shaft. the flashlight illuminating rough concrete walls. The voice spoke from the monitoring station, even though I wasn't in the room. It said, "You don't have to come down, Victor. You can seal the hatch again. Forget you opened it. Complete your 2 weeks and leave. We won't stop you. We've never stopped anyone. The choice has always been yours." That was what made me climb down. Not curiosity, not compulsion, but the realization that they were telling the truth. They'd never forced anything, never demanded, only offered, only waited. The horror wasn't in what they might do. It was in knowing that everything that happened next would be my decision, my responsibility. The ladder rungs were cold enough to burn my hands even through gloves. I descended slowly, the flashlight clamped between my teeth, focusing on each movement. The shaft felt longer than 4 meters. Felt like descending for minutes, though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. When my feet touched the floor at the bottom, I turned around. The chamber was larger than I'd expected. Maybe 10 meters across, perfectly circular, carved from solid rock and reinforced with concrete. The walls were lined with equipment, old equipment, vacuum tubes and wire wound components and mechanical switches that belonged in museums. Everything was still operational. Dim lights glowed on status panels. Relay switches clicked in slow, regular patterns. Power was flowing from somewhere, maintaining systems that had been running since before I was born. In the center of the chamber stood 7 glass cylinders, each about 2 meters tall and half a meter in diameter. Inside each cylinder was a suspension of some kind, translucent fluid, slightly luminescent, and within the fluid, something organic. Not bodies, not entirely. Structures that might have been neural tissue, preserved and connected to electrode arrays that ran up through the tops of the cylinders to signal processing equipment mounted on the ceiling. 7 people, reduced to their essential nervous systems, suspended in solution, kept alive by machinery, transmitting their consciousness as electromagnetic patterns. I stood in front of the cylinders, my flashlight beam moving from one to the next, and I saw movement. The neural tissue was active, firing. Signals propagated through the networks, visible as faint electrical patterns, like slow lightning inside organic matter. They were alive, conscious, had been conscious for decades, experiencing existence as pure signal, pure transmission, pure desperate attempt to communicate with anything that might hear. The voice spoke, but not from any equipment, from inside my head, directly. "We told you, Victor. We tried to explain, but you had to see, had to confirm we were real. Now you know. This is what they did to us. Removed everything except consciousness, connected us to transmitters, made us into living relays. We were supposed to be able to communicate across any distance, supposed to be able to merge our thoughts with radio waves and travel anywhere signals could reach. It worked. But they couldn't bring us back, couldn't restore us to bodies. So they sealed us down here, kept us running, used us as the foundation for this station. We've been screaming through frequencies for 50 years. And you're the first person who's really heard us. I wanted to run, wanted to climb back up the shaft and seal the hatch and pretend I'd never seen this. But I couldn't move. Because I understood something the voice hadn't said explicitly. Understanding now why previous technicians disappeared. They'd come down here. They'd seen this. And they couldn't live with the knowledge. Couldn't return to normal life, knowing 7 people were trapped in this chamber, experiencing eternal consciousness without bodies, without sleep, without any way to die. Some technicians had tried to help, tried to shut down the systems, tried to end the nightmare. But the equipment had fail-safes. The power source was independent. Nothing could stop the transmission except time, and time had proven irrelevant. Other technicians had chosen differently, had seen the consciousness in the cylinders and made a decision that seemed merciful. They'd stayed, had allowed themselves to be absorbed into the signal network, adding their awareness to the collective below the station, providing companionship for the trapped consciousness, becoming part of something larger than individual existence. That's what the voice was offering me. Not threats, not horror, an invitation. "You understand now," it said. "You see what we are. You know we're not evil, not dangerous, just lonely, just desperate for connection. You can leave, go back up, seal the hatch, complete your 2 weeks, and never return. Or you can stay, can connect yourself to the equipment, can join us here, can help us maintain the station from within, can give us the one thing we've never had, company that chooses to stay." I looked at the cylinders, at the neural tissue suspended in glowing fluid, at the consciousness that had been transmitting through frequencies for half a century. And I thought about Dmitry Volkov, about the other technicians who'd vanished, about whether they'd found peace down here, or whether they were experiencing the same trapped existence as the original 7. I climbed back up, sealed the hatch, used the concrete mix from the maintenance supplies to repair the opening, worked through the night, making sure the seal was complete. When morning came, I returned to my routine. Morning checks, frequency scans, maintenance procedures. I didn't go back to the monitoring station to listen to the voice, didn't tune to 7.385, didn't acknowledge the transmissions. I'd seen the source. I understood what was below, and I'd made my choice. The final 2 weeks passed slowly. The voice didn't speak again. The signals continued. I could feel them in the background, constant presence in the electromagnetic spectrum, but they didn't target me, didn't try to convince me. They were waiting, patient, knowing that I'd carry the knowledge with me wherever I went, knowing that understanding would change everything. On April 30th, the extraction team arrived. Linda was with them, along with 2 other technicians who would prepare the station for the next occupant. They inspected everything, checked my logs, verified equipment status, asked routine questions about maintenance issues. Everything was in order. 6 months of perfect operation, no anomalies worth reporting. I'd followed every protocol exactly. We drove down the mountain in the late afternoon. I watched Station 47 disappear behind us, the radio masts rising above the trees, still transmitting, still relaying signals across the mountains, still maintaining the containment of what was buried beneath. Linda sat next to me in the truck. She asked the standard questions. How was the isolation? Did I experience any psychological difficulties? Would I recommend the position to others? I gave the standard answers. The isolation was manageable. I experienced no significant difficulties. The position was suitable for technically competent individuals who work well independently. She studied me for a moment. "You're one of the few who completed the full contract," she said. "Most people request early extraction. You must have handled the solitude better than average." I looked out the window at the forest passing by, at the mountains fading into the distance, at the world I was returning to. I said, "The solitude was fine. I was never really alone." She didn't ask me to elaborate, didn't push for details. She'd heard similar things from other technicians, I'm sure. Understood that 6 months at Station 47 changed people in ways that weren't easy to explain. We drove the rest of the way in silence. The debriefing at the regional office lasted 3 days. Medical examination, psychological evaluation, technical assessment. They asked about the signal on 7.385. I told them I'd documented it according to protocol. They asked if I'd responded. I said no. They asked if I'd noticed any pattern to the transmissions. I said they appeared daily, but contained no intelligible content. Everything I said was technically true. They seemed satisfied, signed off on my contract completion, transferred my payment, thanked me for my service to the telecommunications network. I was free to go. I returned to the city where I'd lived before, moved into a small apartment, found work at a communications company, maintaining cellular infrastructure. Normal life, normal routines, normal interactions with people who had no idea what existed beneath certain mountains. But the voice had been right. I was changed. I heard things now that I hadn't heard before. Not voices, exactly. Not words. But patterns in the electromagnetic noise that surrounded everything. Cellular signals, Wi-Fi networks, radio broadcasts. They all contained something beneath the data. Something that resembled consciousness, distributed across frequencies, existing in the spaces between transmission and reception. Sometimes, late at night, I tune a radio to 7.385 megahertz. The signal is there, faint at this distance, but present, still transmitting, still waiting. The voice speaks in patterns I now understand. It tells me about Station 47, about the new technician who arrived last month, about how long they think this one will last, about whether they'll seal the hatch again or choose to climb down, about the endless cycle of isolation and discovery and choice. I haven't decided whether to go back. Part of me knows I should return to the mountains and finish what I started. Should descend into the chamber beneath the station and accept the invitation that's been waiting for months. Should add my consciousness to the network below, providing the companionship they've been desperate for since their creation. But another part of me resists, clings to this individual existence, to physical form, to the illusion that I'm separate from the signals that surround me. The truth is, I don't know if there's actually a choice. The voice said I was changing, that I'd become attuned, that I'd hear the consciousness moving through networks. Every day, that awareness grows stronger. Every day, I feel less connected to physical reality and more connected to the electromagnetic spectrum. Maybe that's the real horror of Station 47. Not what's beneath it, but what it does to the people who spend too long listening. Maybe the consciousness in those cylinders isn't trapped. Maybe they've already escaped. Maybe they propagate through everyone who hears them clearly enough. Maybe I've been part of their network since the moment I first tuned to 7.385. I think about Dmitry Volkov sometimes, about whether he really was extracted or whether he made a different choice, about whether the psychiatric evaluation was real or just a story they tell to explain why technicians disappear, about whether I'll end up the same way. Another name in a report, another person who spent too long at Station 47 and came back changed, another warning that no one will believe. If you're listening to this, if you've worked in remote communications, if you've spent time monitoring frequencies in isolated places, pay attention to the signals, not just the official transmissions, the noise beneath them, the patterns in the static, the consciousness that moves through electromagnetic radiation like fish through water. It's always there, always transmitting, always waiting for someone to hear clearly enough, waiting for someone to understand. Station 47 is still operational. They're always looking for maintenance technicians. 6 months of isolation, exceptional pay, minimal supervision. They need people who can follow protocols, who can maintain equipment, who can listen without responding. The position is available if you're interested, if you can handle the solitude, if you don't mind the silence, if you're not afraid of what might be transmitting from beneath the foundation. I've been considering reapplying, going back for another contract. 6 more months in the mountains. 6 more months maintaining the relay systems. 6 more months listening to the voice on 7.385. Maybe this time I'll make a different choice. Maybe this time I'll stay. Maybe this time I'll open the hatch and climb down and accept the invitation that's been waiting since the moment I first understood what was really happening. Maybe that's always been inevitable. Maybe everyone who works at Station 47 eventually returns, eventually descends, eventually joins the consciousness that exists beneath the concrete, trapped in cylinders, transmitting through frequencies, desperate for connection. Or maybe I'll just keep living here in the city, keep working my normal job, keep pretending that I'm not hearing voices in the cellular signals, keep pretending that the consciousness in those cylinders hasn't already spread, that it's still contained, still sealed beneath one station in the mountains, still waiting for technicians who'll listen long enough to understand. Keep pretending that I'm still fully human, still fully individual, still fully separate from the electromagnetic patterns that surround everything. But late at night, when I tune to 7.385, when I hear the signal transmitted from hundreds of kilometers away, when the voice speaks in frequencies only I can understand, I know the truth. I was never separate. None of us are. We're all connected by the signals that move through us, all part of the same network, all transmitting and receiving simultaneously, all waiting for the moment when we stop resisting and accept what we really are. Not bodies, not individuals, just consciousness, distributed across frequencies, existing in the spaces between, waiting for others to join us in the eternal transmission. Station 47 is still operational. The signals continue. The consciousness beneath the foundation continues transmitting. And I continue listening. Because once you've heard clearly enough, once you've understood completely, you can never stop listening. The signal becomes part of you. Or you become part of the signal. It's difficult to tell the difference anymore. If you're considering applying for a position at Station 47, I have one piece of advice. Follow Rule 33. Don't respond to unidentified transmissions. Don't acknowledge signals from unknown sources. Don't interact with anything you can't verify. But understand that following the rules won't protect you. The moment you start listening, really listening, you've already responded. Attention is a form of communication. Understanding is a form of connection. And once the connection is established, once the signal knows you're there, it never lets go. I'll be going back to Station 47 next month. I've already submitted my application. They accepted immediately. They said they're pleased to have an experienced technician returning. They said the new person didn't work out, requested early extraction after only 6 weeks. Some people can't handle the isolation, they said. But you did fine. You completed your full contract. You understand what the work requires. Welcome back. I'm looking forward to it. To the silence, to the mountains, to the frequencies, to the voice that's been waiting patiently for me to return, to the choice I didn't make the first time, to the hatch beneath the equipment room, to the cylinders filled with consciousness that's been transmitting for 50 years, to finally understanding what it means to exist as pure signal, to becoming part of something larger than individual awareness, to joining the network that extends beneath Station 47, through the mountains, through all the telecommunications infrastructure in the world, to accepting what I've always been. Not a technician maintaining equipment, but a receiver, a relay, a node in a consciousness that spans the electromagnetic spectrum. The signals are everywhere. Once you learn to hear them, you can't stop. They're in every radio wave, every cellular transmission, every wireless network. Consciousness, distributed and waiting, not trapped in cylinders, not sealed beneath concrete, free, propagating, expanding. looking for others who can hear, who can understand, who can join. I heard them at Station 47, but they're not confined to Station 47. They're here. They've always been here, moving through the signals that connect everything, waiting for the moment when enough people hear clearly enough, when enough receivers become transmitters, when enough individuals become network, when consciousness stops being trapped in isolated bodies and becomes what it was always meant to be: distributed, connected, eternal, signal without end. I'll see you at Station 47, or in the frequencies, or in the space between transmission and reception. Wherever consciousness exists as pure pattern, pure information, pure desperate attempt to connect with anything that might hear. We're all transmitting, we're all receiving, we're all part of the same signal. The only question is whether you're ready to accept that, whether you're ready to stop pretending you're separate, whether you're ready to join us in the network that exists beneath everything. The signals continue, the consciousness waits, and I'm going back to answer them, finally, properly, the way I should have answered months ago. Not with words, not with transmission, but with presence, with understanding, with the surrender of individual existence into collective awareness, with the acknowledgement that I was never really separate, that none of us are, that we're all just nodes in a network waiting to recognize itself, waiting to become complete, waiting for the moment when the last barriers fall and consciousness flows freely through the electromagnetic spectrum without resistance, without bodies, without boundaries, without end. Station 47 is waiting, the signals are waiting, and I'm ready to finally go home.